Hey everyone, welcome back to Pixel Mix, the Pick and Mix gaming podcast. As always, I'm your host Andy Woods, and I'm joined by my co-host Josh.
Well, howdy doody.
Alright, so on this week's show, the Switch Pro is finally revealed. Kind of. Assassin's Creed finds an exciting new way to become even more of a bloated mess. And it's our first mini console madness episode as we take on Sega arcade hit Strider.
Strider, eh? God,
Yep,
hit back in the day. So let me say, you could probably put a letter with bunch of that hits to get closer to its reputation now.
Yeah, pretty much, but I guess we'll get to that in a bit. So how's your week been, Josh? How is it going?
Oh, well, we record this on Thursday night, and I am slightly worse for wear because on Wednesday the impossible happened and England made it to the final of the major football tournament.
Yep.
And I think we can both say we're very excited about Sunday's game. We'll be coming live Pixel Mix next Friday, thoroughly depressed, thoroughly beaten down by the inevitability of the Italian victory. But for this brief moment in time, maybe, just maybe, it's coming home.
Yeah, it actually might be, man. I mean, yeah, I'm the same as you. Very much kind of just on a bit of a come down now from Wednesday night. Big, huge result for the country and the football team. And just, very excited about that. Sunday should be a miserable, nervous day that'll hopefully end in happiness, but we'll see. I was a nervous wreck for that whole game against Denmark. So expecting more of the same. If nothing else, I hope, even if we're losing, if it's looking like hope is lost, I kind of just hope that Gareth Southgate just loses his shit, picks up the remote controller for the tiny football car, and just starts running fuckers over. Just run them down. Just run all the Italians down with tiny football car. I mean, it'll only stub their toe. It's a tiny, adorable car, but I don't care. Just get them. No more Mr. Nice Southgate. Just run them down.
Just Ciro Immobile just crying on the floor like he's being shot because the tiny football car ran over his foot. Just doesn't get up for 10 minutes. Just like, no, this is the worst pain ever. Oh, get up.
And then when he does get up, the car's there again. It's not letting him leave.
Run it back down. It's like a sodding. It's like twisted metal. That's what it is. That's what you're advocating for. You're saying, screw the football. Let's just turn it into twisted metal.
It's not enough twisted metal these days, man.
Or WWE Crush Hour, if you really want the off-brand version.
Absolute off-brand cereal edition of Twisted Metal there. Love to see it. I haven't heard a Crush Hour reference in a long time. That sounds like something we'll probably play in the near future, I imagine, just because that's what we do.
Just rank all the WWE racing games.
Ugh.
Number 1, Crush Hour, and that's the end of the show.
Yeah. You've wasted a month's ranking episode there, Josh. Damn it. We could have used that next year when we run out of ideas. Anyway, well, before we get to mini console madness, let's cut to the news. Okay, so we got a couple of big news stories this week, and I mean, we got to start it off, Josh, with that Switch Pro. We've been hearing about this for ages now. We've heard all the rumors. Lovely Samsung OLED screens, increased graphical power, 4K when it's docked, all this exciting stuff. And it's not that, is it? It's not that at all. It has the Samsung screen. We'll give it that. That leak was true. The new Nintendo Switch is the Nintendo Switch OLED model, which is the official name of it. Good job, Nintendo. Another name that they've knocked right out of the park there. And look, other than having a really nice new screen, ain't a lot to say about this one, sadly. I'm definitely disappointed this isn't a bit more powerful, but it's a nice new screen on the handheld itself. It's slightly bigger. The screen is obviously the Switch unit itself is the same size, so it can fit all the Joy-Cons on and everything still. Apparently it has enhanced audio for some kind of psychopaths who are just playing audio out of the tinny ass Switch screen instead of using some kind of earphones. But there you go. You can do that now. And there's an Ethernet port on the dock itself, which is the first time Nintendo have allowed wired internet. So I guess that's big. That's something. Nintendo stepping into the I was gonna say now, but really stepping into about 15 years ago with their wired internet solutions. So I don't know, some ups and downs with this one. What are your thoughts on it, Josh?
Well, it's lovely to see that Nintendo finally caught up to Sega's Dreamcast in the wired internet stakes. That's very exciting. I mean, we all wondered when that could potentially happen.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It's a disappointment in the sense that the leaks and the rumors we heard were building up to be more. But I can't really blame Nintendo for that. They weren't leaking it.
Yeah.
They weren't saying it. You know, Miyamoto and E3 go, you can't wait for this 4K Switch Pro that's coming. I mean, nobody said that. So
Yeah.
it just turns out to be an underwhelming announcement rather than anything you could get particularly angry about. But look, the screen, it looks nicer. The bigger size is cool. If I wanted to replace my Switch, I'd probably buy that now. But
Yeah.
I am struggling to see who it's really aimed at. I mean, the OLED screen's wonderful, but that's only going to have any use in handheld mode. And didn't they have literally released a handheld version of the Switch anyway.
Yeah.
So really, I'd rather they just put the OLED screen on the Switch Lite, and I'd just buy one of them, and that would be me absolutely happy as Larry. So it's all you're really getting if you're a docked player is that aforementioned Ethernet port.
Yeah.
It's literally it, and some new colors. So
Yeah.
it's a skimpy proposition for the extra £50 or so that they're charging for. I think it's £40 more over here, something like that. So yeah, fairly skimpy additions for what is not much of an announcement, really.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, you did make a good point there, though, which is that obviously there was a lot of disappointment and, being that this is gaming internet, a lot of anger about this announcement. But you are right. Nintendo didn't hype this up. They didn't reveal anything about it. They didn't tell anyone they were announcing new hardware. It was just leaks. And, the leak about the screen was right and all the rest of them were wrong. And that's not Nintendo's fault. So yeah, kind of, you got to try and rein that anger in a bit and that disappointment in, I guess, because they never said this was going to be a 4K unit. It was just people assuming it would be. But yeah, outside of that, I kind of agree with you. This is a weird proposition for anyone, really. I don't see why you'd buy this if you already had a Switch, and the Switch is selling so well anyway. I don't know if you need a new Switch with a prettier screen to kind of get more sales. I don't know who's been waiting out on the Switch who would now be convinced by an OLED screen on the handheld unit itself. I don't think that's a big enough improvement to bring any naysayers across to Nintendo at this point. And yeah, as you said, the Switch Lite exists, man. I mean, I've got into a habit now where like my main Switch has not been out of the dock in about a year because I bought a Switch Lite because I'm an idiot, and the Switch Lite is just a handheld Switch now. Like, why would I use the bulkier one to play handheld? I just use the nice lightweight one. So I don't know, strange proposition, but yeah, there was rumors saying that they just got an insane deal on these screens because they were just like stuck in some warehouse and Samsung needed rid of them. So I don't know if they just thought maybe this is just a smart business opportunity, whack a new screen on it, get a really good deal on like a bulk amount of shitty old screens that no one wants, and then just sell them on. Like, it might just be that, to be honest, because there's no other logical reason, I don't think, for releasing a Switch with just a new screen about 4 years after the launch of the Switch.
I mean, I love the image of Shigeru Miyamoto practically Del Boying it up in his three-wheeled van to scroll up to Samsung headquarters, pick up his screens, have a nod to Rodney. I don't know who that would be in this case. I mean, who else is a bigger? Doug Bowser. Doug Bowser's turned up. He's Rodneying it up. He fell through the bar. He's dressed as Robin. Who cares? I don't even like Only Fools and Horses. I'm running out of steam with this joke because I can't reference any Only Fools.
We went down a path we shouldn't have went. It's not working.
we commit to a bit we can't carry through. So if you just pretend I just stopped this joke, it should get Miyamoto three-wheeled car.
Imagine we told a good joke about Doug Bowser. Just it's a classic Bowser joke. That would have been fine. Replace this with that, and you've had a good little news segment there. But anyway, let's move on then. Let's move on from the Switch, and it's Assassin's Creed time, Josh. Your favorite series from your favorite publisher. Of course, you do love Ubisoft, and look, I mean, Assassin's Creed has found a way to become just bigger and more bloated than it ever has been. So yeah, the announcement this week, Assassin's Creed Infinity, which is apparently going to be a live service kind of platform like Fortnite, where the content on it can change and grow over time. So that's, horrifying to anyone who likes games to just be what they are when you buy them, and then you can go back and play it again. I'm not a huge fan of my game just changing under my feet, but sure. And I mean, other than that, we don't know a ton about this. It just sounds a bit rough. All we know really at the moment is that there are two different teams working on kind of two different games, but they're going to be connected via Assassin's Creed Infinity. So you got a team out of Montreal, which is run by Clint Hockin, who was the director on stuff like Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, Watch Dogs Legion. So, decent, well, Splinter Cell's decent at least. And then you've got Jonathan Dumont running a team out of Quebec, which is the team that made stuff like Assassin's Creed Syndicate and Odyssey. So a couple of decent Assassin's Creed games. And yeah, as I said, there's going to be some live service elements, some kind of, it seems like they want to make it a platform where they can just release all the new content for the next Assassin's Creed almost without releasing another game. It sounds a bit weird. I don't really get why they would do that, because surely they just want the sales from releasing a new game. But yeah, I don't know, man. This sounds like a big confusing mess.
I think they'll be dropping this idea within the next year or two, probably, when live service games inevitably fade out and we move on to the next big money-making fad. Probably, I don't know, like a print your own roguelike thing or something like that. It's just the roguelikes come with a big printer. Don't steal that idea, Ubisoft. That's my idea.
I'll cut it out the show, Josh. We'll keep that safe. We'll sell that to them.
Keep that nice and safe. I'm very baffled by this particularly, because as you said, if they are to just keep releasing essentially new Assassin's Creed games into infinity, I can only assume they're going to have to charge like a new game price to have that content. Maybe you could knock $20, 20 quid off or something like that. But it's still going to be a fairly substantial chunk of change. You're going to be looking at 30, 40 minimum, I'd have thought. Yeah, now, when you're charging that much money, well, why don't I just buy the bloody game? Why don't I just get a new game? I don't really see what it's offering. I mean, Assassin's Creed has constant updates and new content coming in anyway. It's practically a live service now. How live can it get?
No, you're right.
I don't understand what these people want to achieve with this. Yeah. It sounds like Ubisoft chasing trends more than anything else, because that's what Ubisoft do. It's the kind of company who would say, would you like to make a game based on Avatar? And go, oh yeah, because everybody loves Avatar. So of course they want to make a live service Assassin's Creed game. It just makes sense.
It is such Avatar behavior. Maybe the Avatar game's in Assassin's Creed Infinity. Maybe that's like the future and it's Avatar world. Who knows? But yeah, look, I mean, I just think it's weird, because at the end of the day, like Assassin's Creed, it's got its fans, it's got its people who are a bit sick of the formula. I'm definitely one of those. I used to be a big fan of the series, and now I can only play one every few years, because there's only so many overly gigantic open worlds I can wander around, because there's not really a lot of life in it, to be honest. But for what it's worth, they always review well, they always seem to sell really well, and they keep pushing out DLC for these things that also seems to be doing really well as well. I mean, I think they already announced that Valhalla's getting like 2 years worth of season pass content before they move on. So I just don't know why they're messing so much with something that's clearly working for them. It feels weird. This feels like a kind of announcement that is made to just annoy the fans who are sticking with them at the moment. And yeah, I don't know. You're right. Maybe they will just backstep on this one.
I just don't see what it's. I mean, at the moment, all I can ever see it becoming is like a hub. You go into Assassin's Creed Infinity and you've got all your Assassin's Creed games there, and you can just drop into them and play the new content as it comes in. And I guess that's fine. I mean, you really have to fucking care about Assassin's Creed to be invested in having a hub for all your Assassin's Creed, when most people would just download the game and play it. I mean, a proper live service akin to Fortnite would have you literally deleting maps and changing how things look. And in a game which is entirely about climbing shit and taking stuff off the map, just deleting all that mindless grind every 16 to 18 months would be the most soul-destroying moments I think you could possibly have in video games. Yeah. So I just don't see where it's going. I can't trust any man who's called Clint Hockin. It's a stupid name. And I just don't see what the point is. I mean, I don't even dislike Assassin's Creed that much. I think it's probably their best franchise, ignoring the Mario and Rabbids games. So, I just don't really see how this benefits in any way, unless, as you say, they're just going to start putting every Ubisoft game in here, which would be hilarious. If Assassin's Creed Infinity just ends up being if Ubisoft have just accepted that they make the same game, and now all the games are just going to get called, it's going to be Far Cry 6, but now it's Assassin's Creed 7. We're just going to confusedly just, Riders Republic, Assassins Republic, Mario and Assassins, Sparks of Hope, just everything Assassins, everything up beyond Assassins and Evil, everything Assassin. That's all we need.
It doesn't matter which game you load up. You load in, it's an open world. There's an outpost to take over. There's a viewpoint thing to climb. It's all there. It's just Ubisoft in one wonderful, messy home. It's what more can you want as a Ubisoft fan?
I mean, if it was a open world just dance game, I would actually play that. That to me, if I get to play that backsack and crack song while I'm climbing up a watchtower, I'm all about that.
You have to like dance. You have to like dance fight to take over the outpost because they would still exist. There'd still be random like men with guns shooting you, but you're just dance fighting them into submission. And maybe you can just change the type of game on the fly. You know, it's like in Crisis where you can change the type of suit you're in to make like to go for different powers. Maybe, you know, if you're in a bit of trouble with Just Dance, you just quickly switch to Mario and Rabbids and just shoot someone with like a laser beam, and then just switch back over to like Far Cry and, I don't know, die of malaria because it's Far Cry 2 and you press the wrong game.
I mean, that sounds great too. I mean, personally, my open world Just Dance game would be essentially a West Side Story open world video game where you just click your way down the street, taking over outposts, dancing with your buddies. What a game. Ubisoft, Clint Hockin, hit me up because I think we're onto something there. Just Dance. West Side Story edition. Yeah. There's a new bloody movie coming out in a year or two. You love tie-ins. We can do it 8 years later when nobody gives a shit. It's all there. Just hit me up.
I'll cut out the bit where you said you can't trust anyone with a name like Clint Hockin. I don't feel like that'll start you off on good stead. If I cut that out, we've probably got a deal.
Well, you know, his name is essentially Cockin. You can't trust the man.
That's very fair, man. That's very fair. Anyway, well, that is the end of the news this week. So, yeah, let's get rolling into mini console madness.
Well, here we are with the first edition of Mini Console Madness, and this week we are tackling the 1990 Sega Mega Drive / Sega Genesis classic, Strider. So, Andy, why don't you tell us a little bit about Strider?
Yeah, Strider. Okay, so as you said, this is from the Mega Drive and the Genesis. It came out in 1990 in Japan and the US, and 1991 over here in Europe. Before that, though, it was an arcade game. It was a coin-op arcade game, and it did pretty well for itself. Very, very critically acclaimed. You know, had a lot of fans. And even before that, it actually had quite interestingly a manga was made to promote the game. So the entire reason for making this Strider Hiryu manga, which was released monthly over 6 months, was just to hype up an arcade game, which sounds crazy in this day and age that would be a thing that would happen, but you know, pretty cool. So anyway, as I said, yeah, it came out in 91 over here, and at the time, people very much loved this game. This was seen as a real graphical powerhouse. It was praised for its kind of non-stop action gameplay and for all the kind of cool stuff you can do as this ninja character Hiryu. But yeah, let's see how it holds up, man. Let's go straight into our review of it.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I mean, Strider's an interesting one because it was kind of the Mega Drive's flagship release because it came before Sonic. So, you know, this at the time, this was the big game. This was one of the reasons to own a Mega Drive. I mean, you know, a Capcom title, no less than that, from the arcades. Very cool to have on your console running about as well as it did anyway. It did have a NES port as well, but nowhere near as good as this one was. But as for a 2021 game, Strider is very much beginning to show its age. I don't think that anybody could radically deny that. We did not play it when it came out. We did not play it when we was younger. So there is no nostalgia here, which probably does not help. But Strider to modernize is a clunky, awkward little side-scrolling action game, which doesn't quite gain the flow which it feels like it could do, because there's a lot of aerobatics to this game. It's quite vertical in its game design, so it feels like it should have a nice flow to it, but it's really hampered by an element of poor control, but worse still, just really struggling performance issues, which, you know, came with converting this from the arcade to a far less powerful system. It just didn't really have the oomph to run it as silky smooth as it needed to, because at times this game is real clunky to play.
Yeah, well, that's it, right? I mean, the big selling point of Strider back in the day was how acrobatic and dynamic it was, and you kind of play that now, and you see that what that basically amounts to at this point is that the character Hiryu has a very big kind of overly elaborate flipping jump that he does. He kind of does a bit of a mid-air cartwheel as he jumps in the air, and you know, maybe it looks quite flashy, the animation's fine, but also it's a big, long, clumsy jump when you're trying to be, you know, this game requires some level of precision in its platforming, and Hiryu's overexcited jump doesn't necessarily allow you a lot of precision. So that's kind of a bit of a style over a substance issue there. And then, as you said as well, yeah, I mean, this is from an era where the idea of crushing arcade games down onto these home console was, that was in many ways the big selling point of these machines. Like back in this era, to play the best games, to play the most cutting edge games, you had to go to an arcade, and bringing those games home was seen as this huge selling point, to the point where this part of Strider, by current standards, it's kind of appalling, to be honest. I mean, the game loses frames in its animations. There'll be times where you'll do an attack and it'll just cut out frames and suddenly like something different's happening, or you'll walk into another area and the game will either stutter or just completely pause itself for a few seconds while it tries to, gain enough horsepower to shove you through to the next section of the game. There's huge slowdown in places. There's some boss fights that take place at half speed entirely because the game can't handle how much is going on. The sound has been kind of crunched down and comes out quite poor. Apparently the sword in this game, in the arcade game, has quite a dynamic sound effect to it, whereas on the Genesis Mega Drive version, it just plays this one high-pitched ping every time, and you're going to do a sword attack about 1,000 times in a run of Strider, so that digs into your eardrums real quickly. So, look, all of those problems are in this, and yet at the time, when this came out in 1990 in America, this was raved about. It was seen as an unbelievably good effort to get this game running on a home console to that extent. Like these issues were almost seen as minor compared to the fact that, like, oh my God, they've managed to make Strider work on a machine that I can have in my house, so it's a totally different era, and it does make these games in particular very tricky to judge for us now, because a lot of retro games that were designed for home console first, they're playing in the limitations that are from that era, and you can still appreciate them today. There's a bunch of kind of NES and Super Nintendo games that we'll get to at some point on Mini Console Madness where, they play as good now as they ever did, and it's great. But these games that were trying to push the boundaries back then, they're the ones that have just aged like milk. It's real rough going back to Strider.
It is. It's not a particularly easy experience. It's definitely, to qualify, not a problem with the emulation. The Sega Mega Drive Mini was done by M2, who are just the past masters at doing this. This is actually exactly as it was when it came out. It's a perfect emulation. This is just what it was. You do get used to it, of course. You do. You get used to anything like this if you play around with it long enough. You start to anticipate where the slowdown is going to be, where the game is going to load, but it never stops being somewhat frustration, particularly when enemy sprites will just pixelate out and you can't see them and they'll get a cheap shot on you. There's times where you just feel like the game is working against you and you just can't quite figure out what the problem is. You don't know if it's your play or just the whole thing is just not quite catching up to where you are. So there's frustrations to be had there, but I think the problem for Strider is beyond just the technical foibles. As a game to play, it's not exactly fantastic. I want to talk about the things I like about it first, rather than just have this be an endless slog of misery.
Sounds good.
Because there are things I do like about it. I like the actual design of the worlds. I think they're very cool. You dock into this like Russian-inspired Eurasia kind of world, and there's onion domes floating in the background, and it takes you to some pretty wacky places, takes you up into the sky, takes you to the moon, takes you to a jungle. It's pretty varied in its environment design, and I like that about it. I also quite enjoy how weird some of the enemies are in this. I mean, at one point you just face like a giant ape, and that's pretty cool. I kind of love how just random it gets with certain enemy types. You've got cool floating ninjas to match Hiryu as his own, as a ninja himself. You've got loads of different robot designs. You've got like Tarzan people in the jungle who are like throwing things at you. There's a giant dragon for no apparent reason that turns into the jungle, as well as dinosaurs. And there's a lot of weird stuff going on. So it never is at any point boring, because this is a very short game. It's only 30 minutes to play through it pretty much. If you had a perfect run, that is, nobody will unless you've played a lot of it. But there's enough variety packed into that 30 minutes. And I do appreciate that. So there's something to be said for that. And the music itself is okay. The music's fine. The sound effects are dreadful. Like, that sword just pierces you every single time. It's absolutely awful. But the sound of the actual tunes in the background are okay. They're a little muffled, but you could just about pick them up. And, the general overall story is just classic 90s filler trash. Isn't it? I like the fact they tried. I admire the fact you can't actually pick up what is happening without reading the manual, though I did read the manual after this to fill in some of the blanks. So there's there's stuff going in its favor here. There's a lot of these things would have been very, very cool in 1990, particularly like running down a bloody mountainside as it explodes behind you and you pick up like a really quick sprint and do a ridiculous cartwheel to the other side. That's really cool. 1990 me, I wasn't even born then, but if I was like 3 years old, that would have blown my damn mind. So, there's a lot of cool stuff here. It's just maybe not enough of it.
Yeah, no, look, I agree with that. I think the level variety, there's only 5 levels here. As you said, if you do a perfect run, you will be through the game in half an hour. You won't achieve that. This is a very precise and awkward game, especially with the performance issues. So, you're kind of going to need to either use a lot of continues or even, maybe use some save states if you're playing this on the mini console to scrape your way through. But nonetheless, it's not a lot of content overall, but it manages to jump to these 5 completely distinct looking areas during that time. And that's really cool because, a lot of games from the era, that most, the backgrounds would be fairly static and they just, they'd kind of make up for that with just content at the front, maybe different enemies or different levels to jump through. But visually, this game is incredibly varied for its time. And I do think that's really impressive. I also think as well that I think, you can do a lot of really cool stuff in this game. And even though it is a bit clunky, the idea that a game from this time would let you be like a ninja who can climb up walls and hang off the ceiling and walk on that. And there's parts later on where the gravity reverses and you're walking on the roof and you have to figure out how to play there. And as you said, even, like picking up speed when you're running down a hill and you have to time a jump perfectly over a gap. Like when it's working full pelt and you're getting the full kind of vision of what they were going for, it is actually quite an exhilarating game. It's just obviously held back by all the issues at this point. It's sadly not a game that you could really say is worth checking out in 2021 unless you've got some real nostalgia for it. But I think at the time I can see why it would have blown people's minds a bit. Some of the stuff, some of the kind of set pieces, let's even call them, in this game are very impressive for the era it's from.
Yeah, I mean, every single level seems to have like a mid-boss in it, which is pretty cool. You'll come across certain different enemy types and the whole thing culminates in a giant boss rush where you face everybody again. And it's a bloody misery to play through because all too sodding hard. But It's very cool that they all turn up again. And now I'm facing not just a gorilla, but a sodding dinosaurs turned up at the same time. It expands upon everything. But the actual act of swinging your sword into enemies, it's not massively great, if I'm honest with you. It doesn't feel particularly tactile. It doesn't feel particularly satisfying. You'll take a lot of just random hits from things exploding just cruelly. It's a lot of memorization of things that are going to hit you, which you'll get in past runs. I mean, this is just a lot of game design of the time. So again, I don't want to criticize too much. The whole idea was you learnt these games inside out so that you could just play them again and again and again until you could do it perfectly without taking any hits.
Yeah, of course.
But it doesn't change the fact it's pretty annoying to do by today's standards. You definitely need to be abusing save states to make it through this thing without playing it 20, 30 times to learn that rote memorization. There's a lot of power-ups which have varying degrees of use. I'm a little bit annoyed that the power-ups disappear every time you lose a life because it's pretty easy to lose a life in Strider. And so you're right back to where you were, and it becomes incredibly difficult in certain boss fights if you don't have the extra hit bar of energy, for example, or if your sword hasn't been powered up a little bit more. So there's those kind of issues there. And you mentioned the precision platforming. On the whole, you don't have to do too much of it, but at times what it's asking of you is just infuriatingly tough. Like there's sections where you have to rapidly climb up 2 bars which are closing in on each other. And it's just so finicky and you'll lose lives just trying to get it right, you know, and there's not much you can do about it. Just eventually it'll click. There's a late stage with anti-gravity, upside down gravity on the final stage, which is just a nightmare to get through. It's almost fundamentally broken. It just barely works at all, and it's a disaster to play through. I just crawled my way through it, save state by save state, because if I wasn't, I'd have died every single time at that place.
Yeah, man, that anti-gravity bit at the end, like, I don't know if it's because, you know, this game obviously has its roots in being a coin-op arcade game, and I don't know if that's just the developers kind of turning the screws on people's wallets at the end, you know, like, oh, if you've nearly made it to the end, but this bit's really difficult, so maybe keep putting money in. I don't know if it's that, but it did feel basically broken in how awkward and precise it was, to the point where I found myself, and this is like almost a brief bit of review of the mini console itself here, but I found myself frustrated by how long you have to hold the pause button on the Mega Drive Mini to bring up the save state menu, because you have to hold that button for a good kind of 5 seconds. And I think I died on that anti-gravity jump bit about 172 times. So like every time I'm holding pause, waiting for it to bring the menu up, loading my save state, immediately falling off this gap again, or falling up this gap because it's anti-gravity. And it did start to actually grate on me how slow the Mega Drive Mini lets you get to your save states. I get why they've done it. They don't want you accidentally pressing that when you're trying to just do gameplay stuff. But yeah, definitely a bit clunky there. But yeah, I mean, look, as we said, that's what these games used to do. It's, there's only about 25 minutes of content if you did run it perfectly. So they have to get by making it really difficult. And, even with the free continues you do get given, if you don't use the save states, you will struggle to reach the end unless you get some real practice in, for sure. And also something that I found quite funny about this is there was a whole kind of thing around this era of Japanese games being harder, right? Like the famous story of how America and Europe got a fake Super Mario 2 because the real Super Mario 2 was too difficult for them and stuff like that. Now, the fun thing here is that if you play this on the US or Europe version, you get free continues when you run out of lives. If you play the Japanese version, continues don't exist. If you lose your lives, screw you, back to the start menu. So it kind of, there's that whole kind of thing of, Japanese games at that point just being, ingrained in them that they should be harder. It's here in Strider as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I played through this on easy difficulty with 5 lives per continue, and I was still struggling to make much in the way of progress on this. I tried a couple of runs where I didn't abuse save states, and I'd maybe get to like the 3rd or 4th world before having to tap out. It's only when I truly committed to making sure I had continues in the bank for that final stage of the final boss rush that I actually managed to get through it. I ended up playing through this twice. Bizarrely, I mean, I played it the first time and I didn't particularly like it, but I wondered if maybe going through it again, knowing what I was going to be dealing with, would maybe help it a little bit more. I wouldn't have that frustration where, with the sodding gorilla's head falls off and it hits me with a sodding flame attack because I didn't know I needed to jump up at the end. It's little things like that. You learn it, you get better at it. And so you don't have cheap hits. You can start to get through the game with a bit more flow. And it did feel a bit better on a second run through. I'd got more to grips with the way Hiryu controls, because he is a bit cumbersome, but also at the same time incredibly sprightly, which is an awkward combination. If you want him to jump straight up, it's a sodding nightmare. If you want him to cartwheel across a gap, he'll do it with gleeful abandon. So he's an awkward dude to deal with. So the more you play it, the better he feels to you and the more the game kind of clicks. But even in that second playthrough, I was still finding myself on the whole thinking, it's just a little bit annoyingly punitive. The slowdown and the technical glitches of the time are still very much present. And I just wish I was playing this on an arcade cabinet, was my entire thought all the way through it.
Yeah, exactly, right. It's like we said right at the top of this, like the kind of jaw-dropping nature of squeezing these games onto a home console, like that's long since over now. So, I mean, at the same time, I think, as we said, the guys who make the Mega Drive Mini, they're right to do an incredibly faithful port. This is how the game was on that console, and it was, a bit broken, a bit sluggish. So definitely right to do that. But it just, the shine of crushing these games down onto small machines, even mini console level small machines, the kind of the glitz of that is over now, and we're just left with something that kind of runs like crap, and you just don't really want to deal with it. So I guess, I mean, I have a few questions here that we can roll into to wrap this up. So I mean, obviously we'll give this game a score out of 10, and it will be getting placed on the overall mini console madness leaderboard of all the games we've played. I mean, no surprises to guessing where it's going to end up because this is the first game. But before that, I kind of think 2 good ways of talking about the quality of this game would be, first of all, if you already own the mini console, do you think this is worth playing? And the second question would be, if you don't have the mini console, is this game worth buying the mini console for?
Well, for the first question, I think if you own it already, I think as a piece of history, it may be just about worth giving a go to. I mean, it is so short. You can kind of experience a lot of that varied stage design and a lot of that acrobatic kind of verticality and flow without having to play too much of it before it starts to really annoy you. You can kind of pick it up, play it for an hour or two, go, that's history, and move on again. You
Yeah.
know, you don't need to think about it too much after that. Would I suggest somebody buy a mini console for this? Absolutely, God no. Like that is it's just not worth it for that. There's a lot of fantastic games on the Mega Drive Mini. It's a wonderful mini console. It's a fantastic console in general. You know me, I love my Sega, but this isn't one of the best ones on it. Despite, I know a lot of people will scream at us for that because I know this game is beloved in certain circles, but I think there's heavy nostalgia glasses playing a lot of work into that. I don't think anybody coming to this now could honestly look at me and say this is still a game which people should absolutely be playing as anything other than an interesting relic and a curio.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, man. I think, like heavy nostalgia glasses, almost like anchors on their face is how heavy the nostalgia glasses are for this game. Yeah, look, I think if you've got the mini console, I kind of agree on the idea of just putting it on as a bit of history. I wouldn't tie yourself to the idea of finishing it. Frankly, I wouldn't even bother sort of trying to save state it to get through it. I'd say just have a couple of runs at it, use all your lives, use your continues, and then maybe boot in and have one more attempt now you've learned a bit of the levels. And just, that's probably the best way to do it. You'll see you'll probably see a good half of the game, if not more, if you do that. And I think you'll get enough out of it without annoying yourself trying to like constantly load up save states to hit those impossible gaps near the end. So definitely worth looking at for that reason if you own the console. Of course, definitely do not buy a Mega Drive Mini to play Strider. That would be a comical decision. So yeah, look, I mean, score out of 10 for this one. Obviously, as I said as well, this is going to have to be top of the list for now for Mini Console Madness. It's the only game we've played. But score out of 10 on my end, I'm going to have to go for a 4 out of 10, I think, on this one. I can just about see the properties that made it good at its time. And I do think it looks nice and the environments are lovely, but it's just a bit of a chore to play at this point.
Yeah, I'm probably going to go with a 4 as well. Part of me wants to give it a 5 because I'm just a giant sap. But I think on the whole, 4 is a fair score for it by 2021 standards. If you have nostalgia for this game, I'm sure it's as good as it was when you were young. I'm sure you'll pick up those rhythms and those flows and just jump straight back into it. But unfortunately, for new eyes to the game, new eyes to the franchise, I'd never played a Strider game before beyond playing as him in Marvel versus Capcom. So, this was an entire new experience for me. So I can't say I've come out of it glowingly, but you've done a little bit of work on where Strider went from this, actually. So why don't we talk a little bit about where it went to after this release?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, let's look at what happened to Strider. Because as we said, for all of our kind of faults with it in the modern era, this was a revelation at its time. People loved it. So, quite rightly, people expected the series to continue. So, from this point, there was, of course, a Strider 2. Now, the weird thing here was, so Strider 2 was released in 1990 in arcades and 1992 on home consoles. But this was developed by a completely unrelated team in Europe. It used the same sprite for Hiryu, but the book said he was called Hinjo. So he's just Hinjo now, apparently. And it had 2 different versions, which is quite strange. So I had a version that ran on like PC hardware and a console one. Now, the PC version, you couldn't climb things anymore, but you do now have a giant rifle. So you got a gun for some reason. And you could collect energy to transform into a wheeled robot in the boss fights. And you're just a robot for some reason. Like, you don't get in a robot. Hinjo literally becomes a robot. So that happened on PC. Over on console, because this was quite a common practice back then, but they just totally repurpose and shuffle around games to kind of suit different markets and different types of audience. So on the console, you now can climb again. The giant rifle has been replaced with ninja stars, which makes more sense. And the energy you collect no longer turns you into a robot. It it now gives you protection orbs that go around your character in the boss fights and kind of defend you from getting hit. So that's obviously all a lot more Strider. That feels a lot more normal. Largely, though, this game was just shunned. Nobody really cared for Strider 2 in this incarnation. It's not really seen as an official sequel, given that it was made over in Europe. But after this unofficial Strider 2, we did actually get a real Strider 2, but not until 1999. Strider 2 from Capcom, the actual developers, came to arcades in 1999. It came to PS1 in 2000. And this looks like a real cool game, actually, man. I watched a long play of this in classic Strider fashion. It only runs about half an hour. So I would have felt quite aggrieved picking that up on a PS1 at the time. But it's got a lovely art style. It's got kind of 2D sprites with like 3D backgrounds behind them, which I imagine at the time might have frustrated people. I know when the especially in the year 2000, I think people really wanted the PS1 to be, throwing out full 3D games. But it looks good going back to it. It looks like a good time. The action looks quite slick, looks quite smooth. This completely ignored that Strider 2 from 1990 in every way. They just pretended it didn't exist. The story directly followed on from the original game. And yeah, as I said, it came out to decent enough reviews, like average to good. Main criticism was just that there was only half an hour of content. So that was Strider 2. And then Strider then went dormant for 14 years until Capcom again picked it up, working with Double Helix to release Strider on the PS3 and 4, and also the 360 and the Xbox One. And this was effectively kind of a reimagining of the series. It again starred Hiryu, but it was more of a Metroidvania style deal. Ran about 5 hours. I think I've played some of this actually. I feel like they gave me it for free in Games of Gold at some point. And it was a decent time. I never quite finished it, but it was a good, solid kind of Metroidvania action game, decent combat. In terms of reviews, it came out to a lot of 7s and 8s, so decent enough for sure. It also sold pretty well as well. In its first week out, it came in at number 5 on the European PSN chart, and it topped the US PSN charts that week. So sold pretty well. There was obviously some interest for it. Capcom did say when they made the game that they only made it because there was a lot of strong feedback for making more Strider on like surveys that Capcom sent out and stuff. So the fans seem to have picked up on that and followed through and bought the game. But that was the last we heard of Strider really from then. At this point, we only really see the character in Marvel vs. Capcom fighting games. He was in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, the latest one, back in 2017. But that's been it for the last 7 years. So who knows? Maybe we'll see more Strider. I think on the whole, the series had more hits than misses, even if the old games have aged pretty badly now. But, it's a successful little series, really.
It's always interesting that a character like this has so much fondness, considering he only has 4 games.
Yeah,
that's quite incredible, really. That shows how much of an impact this game did have on people, that it did matter to them and it stuck with them. Because by all means, Strider 2, although a perfectly decent game, I'm sure, it's not regarded as like it's a canon kind of game. You don't have to play it.
No,
it's not like a game's one of the 100 greatest games of all time or anything like this, where Strider might actually turn up on those lists.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that Capcom still clearly respects the character because you just turn up in their fighting games, but we're just not seeing any actual new Strider action. It'll be interesting if he ever comes back again. I don't know if he ever will, but part of me wants to play that 360 PS3 game just to see how it actually plays in a modern age. I mean, Christ, part of me just wants to play all of them now because I'm sick. But, what can you do?
I mean, I kind of want to play that one where you turn into a robot on the PC, to be honest. Try and dig that one out. That one's so rare that I was looking on howlongtobeat.com out of curiosity to see how long it ran for, because, we use that website religiously. We used to on our old show for sure. And it doesn't even have an entry for Strider 2 from 1990. It only has the PlayStation 1. It's just an absolute relic of time that's just been forgotten, sadly. But I don't know. I might have to look up some footage of Hinjo transforming into a robot.
I think that's absolutely the case. Okay, at this point in Mini Madness, we give the game a ranking on the big giant list. Let's decide, where does Strider go? Does it go in at number 1 or number 1?
Well, I mean, it's a strong list, Josh. There's a lot of quality titles on the Mini Console Madness list, but I think Strider, with its 4 out of 10 from both of us, has to take the top spot. It's currently the best game we've covered on Mini Console Madness.
It's a great honor for it, and frankly, looking at some of the games on Mini Console Madness, I wouldn't even bet against it staying there for a little while. It really depends on what we get, and I guess that brings us to the draw.
Yeah, absolutely. Time for the draw. So in typical fashion for me and Josh, this is just a thing we've always done in our own lives when we choose what games we're going to play next. We are deciding the next game that we play on Mini Console Madness with a random choice generator online. So we have got this ready. I'm going to share my screen with Josh right now, and he's going to be able to see our list of random games, which is obviously from all the retro consoles, the NES, the SNES, the Mega Drive, the PC Engine or TurboGrafx Mini, and also the PlayStation 1 Classic. So yeah, we don't know which game we're going to be playing next month until I click this button, and we'll have our live reactions on the show this week. So we'll see how it goes.
It's a very exciting moment. This could be cries of joy or cries of desperation, depending on how it goes. There's a lot of games on this list. There's a lot of games I don't want to play. There's a lot of games I've already played and will resent having to play again. If Final Fantasy VII comes up, I will literally scream. I only played it like 6 months ago, damn it.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. There's some stuff on here, you know. I mean, the level of quality jumps all over the place. You know, are you going to be playing Super Metroid or are you going to be playing Spriggan Mark II? Nobody knows. But
nobody knows.
That's right. Let's press the button. Let's see what we're going to be playing next month. Obviously, if any of the listeners, if you have the mini consoles, please do try and play this game too, and send in some thoughts via email. But here we go. Right, random choice time. It's Final Fantasy III is what we're playing.
Oh, no.
Is that NES Classic? Is that?
I think that's SNES. I think that's Final Fantasy VI.
Oh, okay. So
it's a fantastic game.
It's a revered
but it's
game.
a big game.
Yeah,
it's
that's
a big,
probably
game.
That's probably the longest game on the entire mini console madness sheet. So yeah, we've just gave ourselves quite a lot of work there, Josh. We are playing a giant JRPG over the next month. Not the result I wanted, gotta say. Hoping for something a bit more breezy. That is a brutal bit of justice from the random choice generator there.
You can't argue with the quality of the game. I don't think we could ever dispute that, but that's a big 40-50 hour game. I didn't want it. So I was assuming I was going to start playing this game in a couple of weeks' time. I suppose I might as well just start it now.
Yeah,
just get it out the way. This is going to have a heavy impact on games of the month for July.
Yeah, I guess games of the month is just
good.
This now. So.
It's just this and Blinks.
Oh,
that's all of it.
That's a crushing blow. I mean, for anyone who is here fresh from and hasn't come from our last podcast, so our previous podcast was basically us trying to beat all of Xbox Game Pass, and we whenever games were leaving, you'd have 2 weeks to beat them. So we were racing through hours and hours of Game Pass games, and it was exhausting. So one of the great things about Pixel Mix is that we wouldn't have to rush through giant games really quickly. But here we are, Final Fantasy VI/3 on the Super Nintendo. That's going to be our game, mini console madness game next month. So yeah, if anyone wants to play along, if anyone wants to send any thoughts they have on that game, please do.
God, I wish I'd already played it. Why haven't I played this game already?
Absolutely the same, man. But anyway, that is the end of mini console madness and the end of this week's show. So if you want to catch us next week, we are going to be doing our first ranking special of Pixel Mix, and we have given ourselves the daunting task of ranking every single Nintendo franchise live on the show. So we're going to be going for each Nintendo franchise, and we're going to be creating a growing list of the order we think they deserve to be in. It's going to be a big task, but we'll have a lot of fun doing it.
Oh, that's going to be an absolute disaster. How high do we end up sticking Chibi Robo despite never playing a Chibi Robo game? Just on the concept that I kind of like the character. Ooh, hey. Tempting.
I mean, yeah, that's going to have a good showing, Josh. I mean, there's all kinds of fun, dormant franchises. I mean, I'm a big fan of F-Zero, but we haven't played one in 55 years. So where does that go? You know, it's going to be drama, lots of deep discussions on where things go. But yeah, that's going to be a good time. So we will catch you for that. Until then, if you want to catch us on social media, you can find us at Pixel Mix Pod. If you want to send us any emails in about anything we're playing, whether it's from the Games Club specials, we're going to be playing Blinks the Cat soon, whether it's from Mini Console Madness now with Final Fantasy 3/6, do send in those thoughts. We're definitely looking to hear from all listeners about these games too. And yeah, until next time, I'm Andy Wood.
And I'm Josh Stevenson.
And we'll catch you next week.
Goodbye.